Hmm? Oh, okay. Well, hello, everybody. It's Friday night again, and we are Source Booksellers once again bringing you a virtual author event. We're pretty excited about this way of doing things now, even though it's a little different than what we had been accustomed to before the pandemic and the shutdowns and everything. But we really think that this is a new way to use the technology and to reach across many borders and lines and be in contact with lots of people. And today we're really delighted to have two outstanding, younger, I would say, I can say that because I'm older, younger writers who have produced books and have quite a following, and I'm so proud of them. So we're going to get started. For those of you who don't know, Source Booksellers is in Midtown Detroit. We are a nonfiction bookstore primarily, and we are always so happy to find new voices that we can bring into the store and then send out to our customers and our base of people who have supported us so much through the years. So one of our major categories is history and culture. And these two young men today are going to be talking in that category. We also have books on health and well-being, books that are by and about women, metaphysical, spiritual, new age, and the arts. And then we take care of our young readers with the same kind of topics as that. The change in our business has allowed us to be able to reach almost any book for a person. So we're happy not only to keep our regular DNA going, but also to find things for you. So let us know your needs and stay tuned. So here we go.
All right, so we're really excited about this book in particular because our nonfiction niche is what we provide, and this is a really good book for our political environment. So we're gonna introduce you to our speakers.
Mychal. There they are. Hi.
Hello.
We're here.
We're here. We're here.
So welcome, Mychal Denzel Smith and Darnell Moore. Pretty soon we're going to turn it right over to you to have conversation, but Allison first. Yeah. I have to take my cues from Allison because
no, we have a question for you.
Yeah, we do. But first of all, we need the audience to know that we have Mychal Denzel Smith as our author this evening. But the good part about this is that Mychal Denzel Smith was also the author of Invisible Man Got the Whole World Watching. And I was pushing this book also, Mychal, during the summer because our local public radio station, WDET, has a book club every summer. And this year they chose Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. And so we were pairing this one with their work. I can't really say how many people did it, but we really loved being able to put this together with the Ralph Ellison book that was published in 1952 or 3, something like that. Okay. So they read that all summer long. But today we have Mychal Denzel Smith's newest book, The Stakes is High. And you know, Mychal, I tried to say the stakes are, because that's how old a person I am. But I got it, and Allison helped me to know where it was coming from. So you want to...
Well, on our Eventbrite, we did have a little video of The Stakes is High from De La Soul because the music had to do with Jay Dilla, who is so close to our heart here in Detroit, and we even have Dilla Day. So thank you for that.
And along with Mychal, we have been really delighted to have Allison.
Darnell
Moore, who in his own right is a major publisher, author, and has been published in many ways. So this is really a special evening of two I want to say young Black men, because I say that because we have a customer who has come in more than one time who is not really old. He's maybe in his early 40s, who says, "Where are all the scholars today? We don't have the same people we had." I said, "No, we don't, but we have new people who are as scholarly, if not more, but who are talking and answering and thinking about the questions of today." And so I am just really thrilled that the two of you are here together to talk with each other about your work and to let us share with people that we have scholarly work going on in many places, and with especially, I think, young Black men, and because you're dear to my heart. And so I'm glad. So we have a question. Oh, yes, I always have a question when we open up. See, I rely on her. And that is, what caused you to write this second book? I know you did the first one, and I remember that one really well. And we met at the American Booksellers Association event, and we were invited to dinner with you to meet you. And so that was our first meeting, several years ago. It's been about 3 or 4 now.
Yeah,
And I want to know what got you to the second book, because frequently when people talk to me about writing a book or they wrote a book, I always say, well, what's the second one? What's next? The first one, you get stuff out, and then the second one. So tell us, how did you get to The Stakes is High?
First of all, just thank you so much for hosting this event and having me. It means so much to me to be able to be a part of this. I wish could be in person and be at the bookstore, but we're adapting to the times and our needs right now. It really, truly, the genesis of this book is the 2016 election. And I think of that both in terms of like where I was personally and then where we were as a nation and across the globe. I turned 30 years old 2 days before that election. And I had been going through a sort of a very typical existential crisis of turning 30 that I thought I dismissed before I turned 30. And it was just like, it's not going to happen to me. It's not a thing. But what I think I was realizing so much during that time is the book, Invisible Man Got the Whole World Watching, came out earlier that year. And I basically achieved everything that I had set out to do. I published the book, and that was all that I had wanted for my life. And I was approaching 30, and I was realizing, I don't have a plan for after this, because I never anticipated that it would be possible. Like I just grown up with the messaging that young Black men's lives, they end early, and I just assumed it would be the same for me. So there was nothing that I thought of that or conceived of a future past whatever age, and especially not 30. So I was in this position where it's like, I have to figure out what's next for me as a person, and like what I want my life to look like the rest of the way. That and now that I know that there could be a rest of the way. But that coincided with the election of Donald Trump just 2 days after I turned 30, in which it felt like, maybe there won't be a future. Maybe the world is ending. So this book is sort of born of sitting between those two poles, where I'm saying, no, I do want a future, not just for myself, but for all of us. This thing that I never thought was possible, or up to this point didn't think was possible. And I'm saying, how do we get there? How do we get there for all of us? How do we reckon with the present crisis that is born of our historic crises? And how do we collectively respond to this moment in order to chart a different path forward? And so the book is really the tension between all of those things, and the exploration of ideas, trying to get us to understand like what's possible.
Awesome. We won't hold you up anymore because we're so excited about your conversation.
I want to bring Darnell in for just a minute, because I don't want to slight him with his book. There it is right there, see? And when I was reading a little bit of this, everybody talks about your writing, that you're so poetic and I won't say just imaginative, but your writing is very poetic. And I thought, what a great way to enter this conversation about the subjects that you're talking about and bring the idea of poetry into it. Because as far as I can tell, poetry is always a distillation of ideas in a way that's very magical. So now the two of you go at it. I want you to talk to each other, talk about your work, talk about your books, and every now and then we'll pop in and maybe add a little something.
Maybe we'll help with questions if they come.
Thank you so much. I just want to echo Mychal and just say big thanks to Source Bookstore for not only inviting me to be in conversation, really in celebration of Mychal, but for all that you do for Black literature and for all that you do for Black writers and for literature in general. And what I should say, I'm glad that you referenced that book, because I would be remiss to not name the reason why I had my first book is largely because of Mychal's doing. Mychal invited me to speak because he's Mychal. He was doing his book launch, and instead of just taking all the time to celebrate himself and looked up his book, he invited five writers to come and share works from books in progress, or works in progress. And I shared a chapter from that book, and it was because of that I ended up in the same publishing house as Mychal. So I come to this with gratitude for him, not just as a brother, as someone whose words I have fallen in love with and have read over the course of the last several years, actually the past decade of my life, but as someone who I also got to build community with. I used to bother him on Twitter and tell him how much I used to stand for his words. And now here I am able to celebrate him on the occasion of the launch of his second book. So I want to share something I know about Mychal, which leads to the first question. There are ways that as writers, we find ourselves, some of us, we break in order to write. It can be a process that is as hard as it is beautiful. I remember when Mychal's first book came out, when he was done, we were driving uptown in a car, I'm embarrassing him, and he broke out in tears because of what he was able to accomplish and all that he pushed through. And I know, so here's a person who is not just given and birthing us words, but out of the words comes a new self. So I want to start with the process. And I know people read your words and they're stunned by the beauty of your words, because they are beautiful, they are incisive, but what they don't get to see is the breaking and the unbreaking that happens in the background, all that it takes for you to birth words into being. So talk a bit about your process, both on the process of writing the book and the process of becoming, even as you were writing it, this book too.
Yeah. Whew. It's heavy, man. As our brother Kiese Lehman's book is called Heavy, because you're right. I think, the thing that's so exhausting about writing a book is that you are pushing through what your own limitations are in that moment to try to create this vision that you have, right? And it's taunting you constantly, just being like, maybe you're not good enough to achieve that thing right now. And so it's like the page scares you every single time as you approach it, because it's just like, I have these grand ambitions, but am I the person that I need to be able to write it? And like the process of doing that is becoming the person that's capable of doing it. This book, I didn't even start out writing this one, right? Like after Invisible Man Got the Whole World Watching came out, after I turned 30 and have this whole scare and like the election and everything, I wanted to do a completely different book. I was trying to run away from, American politics and Donald Trump and all of that. I was continuing on sort of some of the themes of Invisible Man, and I was going to write this book about like sites of Black masculinity, the ways that it gets formed in different physical spaces and that are become anchors of community within, and that sort of problematize some of those things. And what, that was the next idea. But then, I said I was trying to run away from Donald Trump, but the very first sentence that I wrote was about Election Day in my barbershop, because that's what was so prescient for me. And so then it was, okay, now I'm moving on from that project. I recognize that there's something else here that I have to do. There's a responsibility that I'm running away from, you know. And then there was conceiving of this book in its early form. And this book, you know, the form that it's in now, I originally had like 13 essays that I was going to be writing, 13 individual essays that were going to tackle single subject matter. And you know, the process of writing it just, all of that seemed to be, it was too much. There was too much jumbled in there. My thoughts weren't cohering, and I wasn't able to focus. And you know, I'm a person who exists in the world and is also paying attention. And also, this book is very much about everything that's happening in the world. So it's paying attention to and doom scrolling through Twitter like so many people, and just seeing the utter destruction that was coming forth, and you know, feeling helpless and feeling like there's too much death, there's too much despair for me to rise out of that, and feel like there's something that I can produce on the other side of this, and feeling like there's a futility in even writing, that there's no point to it. But what am I doing writing words when they're locking kids up in cages? What is that serving? And it all came to bear. And so, you know, we have the same editor, Katie O'Donnell, and I would tell her, I would be like, yeah, it's coming, don't worry, yeah, I can have it by, and then it's months
I think
later.
we do the same thing. She knows us too well. Months later, it turns into a year, and I'm like, okay.
Exactly, and that's exactly what happened with this book, was just me saying, you know, no, I want to have it done. I want to be working on it, but feeling too much like that first part of what I was saying, like I don't have the ability to capture what it is that I want to. And then also, you know, the world is too much, it's too heavy. And so all of that is the breaking, right? And I broke several times trying to write this book. I broke down, and I don't know. I think really the only way to have gotten this done was to believe that it was meaningful, is going to be meaningful to someone, and to keep always the view that, you know, they're constantly lying, and somebody has to leave a record of the truth. You know, it's so often we talk about history, and people will talk about atrocities of history. They'll talk about slavery, they'll talk about segregation, they'll talk about different gendered forms of violence that, you know, were more prevalent in the past. Not to say that any of these things have disappeared, but like more prevalent in the past. And they'll say, oh, those were people of their time. But what you and I know, and what so many of us know, is that there are other people of that time leaving a record of dissent, leaving a record that these actions were unjust. And so I had to leave that record. I had to say, for whoever comes after us, that no, there were other people who lived through this and didn't believe in the inherent like violence of the system, who tried to change it, who were there to force a reckoning. And that was just a responsibility that I felt like I had to take on. And so the becoming, and I think I'm still in the process of understanding like what this book has produced inside of me. Like I'm still trying to understand that, just having just released it and everything. But I think that it helped me to step into a place of understanding like what my role potentially is, right? Like what I am documenting and why I'm documenting it, why I'm trying to push people on certain ideas, why I'm engaging with people who believe themselves to be, or want to believe themselves to be good, and pushing them through different conceptions of what that means, and redefining terms for people, because, you know, that's what I can do, that's what I can contribute, and hopefully this is a beginning for a lot of people to start doing that work, and for me, a clearer understanding of what role that I'll be playing as my career goes forward. You said you've been reading me for 10 years, and I was like, damn, I'm old now. Like, I've been doing this for a minute, but
You've been out here. You've been out
it's just
here.
like, yeah, it's like realizing, you know, that I'm a completely different writer from 10 years ago. And I'm always trying to push myself to be new, because, you know, because we face different challenges, and we face new things that we need to confront and to question. And also for my own just intellectual growth is to say, like, I need to challenge myself as well.
Listen, yeah, for y'all that are watching, this is why I love Mychal. He knows how much I love him, and I love his words. Also, as we're talking, if you have questions, we will have a moment where we can do a Q&A. Plug those into the Q&A box, and I'll be sure to try to pull a few of those. But I want to read some of your words before I ask a question. I know, writers, we hate to hear our words read, but when your words are, you know, sublime and incisive and honest, they need to be heard. They need to be read. So I'm going to read some of your words. You write, it's only logical from the standpoint of the empire to swallow up anything that may threaten its existence. Dissent is inevitable, but need not be destructive. By co-opting the heroes of insurgents, the empire is able to bolster its constructed moral authority. I refuse euphemisms here to speak directly of America's status as an empire because it cannot honestly be called anything but. We speak dryly of America's role as the world's police, as if this is not a limp way of saying empire. We unironically refer to ourselves, I got it, as the leaders of the free world, when in a truly free world, the notions of a singular leader of said free world would be ridiculous. Moreover, if that leader was a nation that made up only 5% of the global population and imposed its will on other nations at the threat of military violence and devastating economic sanctions, a free people in a free world would call that nation an empire. I can sense as I write this, those vociferous voice critics of American empire chastising me for the use of we here. To cast a we in a country so bitterly defined by its divisions is, in so many ways, to do what I have just criticized, in that it presumes a kind of unity that does not actually exist, and that I understand the objections. What I hope for is in naming a we here is not to flatten the American identity into one of homogeneous, uncritical agreement, but to own my place within the system. It is one thing to name the empire, and another to consider yourself as a citizen of it. I am an American fraught as that designation is, and not simply because I was born here, right in the nation's capital, nor is it because the wealth of this nation was built by my ancestors' labor, though it is that too. America is my inheritance, but I want to own that I'm a product of American thinking. I can go on and on and on and on here, but what I want to name is this point that you raise about placing our sort of dissent into the American letters, writing out our dissent, naming our dissent, naming a truth. And here, your book offers up a stunning critique of empire, a stunning critique of our complicities in empire, but also in it is a hope. Because in order to get to freedom, in order to get the liberation, we got to tear down or destabilize or reimagine a thing that isn't working in order for it to be anew. It's a freedom dream present here. Can you talk about the tension in writing a book where you try to be as plain as possible with the atrocities, the violences that are enacted upon Black people, even as you don't fall into the nihilistic trap of forgetting that it's going to take Black people's freedom dreams in order to build the world anew?
Yeah, and you know, it's a beautiful way of putting it, because it is, I think that for me, it's that the atrocities are so easily named, right? Like they're in plain sight. It's that the distortion of empire is to convince us that they are not what they are, right? Like that's really what it is. That's the only thing that's what we're fighting up against. is that in order for the empire to protect itself, in order for American white supremacist heteropatriarchal capitalism to protect itself, it redefines the very violence that it enacts on people. And it casts that violence as patriotism. It casts that violence as necessary for the protection of freedom, right? But if we just look at it on its face and we name it for what it is, that in itself is a form of resistance to say that I will not allow the definitions of empire to impact the way that I engage what I know to be a systematically violent and repressive regime. So the passage that you read, and I say, like, I want to resist euphemism because, yeah, we do find different ways of talking about American empire without naming it as American empire. We'll say that we have the duty to protect democracy across the globe. And what does that mean? But military intervention in places where we believe that we're supposed to, protect democracy per se. But how does a democracy impose democracy on other people through violence? That doesn't jive with the idea of democracy. How many colonies is a democracy allowed to have? Because by American count, you have at least 3 of them, and then you have military bases across the globe. So if that's anything but empire, the only reason that you think of it as such is because the empire has defined the terms by which you then call it an empire. And so there's the resisting of that and plainly stating exactly what you see. The trap of nihilism is to then say that simply because a thing exists, because the violence exists, it will always exist, and there's no point to anything. There's no reason to fight back because there simply is just always going to be this thing. There's not always going to be anything. Right? Like there's no guarantee of anything. What we have is a extremely violent and repressive structures in this country that make people reliant on those very structures for their survival, and then a level of complacency with that, and then ways in which the American narrative has lots of people believing that they could be the winners of that system and that they can transact their way through that and be like, I will work my way up through that, and I will achieve, and I will have all of the luxuries and things afforded by the American dream. And you have very powerful people controlling massive amounts of wealth and cultural capital in all of our institutions that are reinforcing that narrative over and over and over again. And so, yes, it looks bleak, and I don't try to pretend that it's not an extremely that it doesn't look at right now like a Sisyphean task of constantly fighting and pushing that boulder up the hill. But what I want us to believe, because what other option do we have? The other option is to fall into the nihilistic trap and to believe essentially that there is nothing better and that we accept our fate. On the other side of that is to say, whatever world we want, we can build. This world was built by people who wanted this version, right? Like, this is exactly what they wanted. This is not accidental. But if we, and I use the we here to say, if we are critics of that system, and we are people who resist that, and we are people who are defiant, collectively, we are powerful in coming together and establishing actual forms of democracy, not just democracy in government, democracy in our economic structures, democracy in our communities, in our communal relationships. And when I say democracy, what I simply mean is that we are coming together to discuss our problems with one another and finding suitable solutions to them in ways that protect all of us. we have that within us. Like we see it in pockets. We see it in response to a global pandemic. We see mutual aid networks. We know what that looks like. We know how to care for one another when it's in these dire circumstances. Can we look at that and say, that's actually what we want all the time? And that's what we want our policy to reflect. And we can. It's a matter of believing that it's possible first, and then with the collective will, with the collective belief that it is possible, organizing around that, and then enacting those things through what may seem to some like extreme measures, militant action and everything, but we fight because we know that it's possible, or because our desire for it supersedes our desire to allow for these systems to grind us and to prevent us from even thinking or dreaming in that way. I have to believe it's possible. There's nothing else that that if I didn't, I wouldn't do this work at all. If I didn't, if I just believed that these systems and these violences are inevitable, then there would be no point in me pointing them out. It would just be to say, oh, that they exist. I'm pointing them out because I want to change them.
Well, the thing that I love about your writing, not just in Stakes is High, but also present in book one, also present in all your writing, is a level of awareness of self. And this is something you share. I do think we're part of a writing family like Kiese and Marlon Peterson and Mark Anthony Neal, of folk who are not afraid of self-reflexive analysis.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's so hard. It's easy to write the critique and sort of point it in the direction of everybody else. It's harder to locate yourself in the critique that you're levying out. Talk a little bit about that, because you show up in your writing. You're not letting yourself off the hook, and that's a hard thing for writers to do.
And and so much of this is your influence, and I want you to own that and hear that, because like I forget where it was that you said it, but I heard you say it. You were preaching, because you be preaching, and you said that it's easy to recognize whose boot is on your neck. It is much harder to recognize whose neck your boot is on. And that stuck with me. It just changed the whole way that I conceive of the work that I do, because it's so correct that we do this where we look out and we see the injustice that we face. We see it so clearly. And we fight that so hard. But what has been present within our movements and within our literature for so long has been a reflection then of a desire not to change the conditions of oppression for everyone, but conditions of oppression for yourself. And not a recognition that you play a role in someone else's oppression, and that you have an obligation to end that, because that's where it starts, is understanding like what you can do for someone else's freedom, right? Like the responsibility to one another, the caring for one another. If you actually believe in liberation, then you have to understand that you are, for everything that you experience on that side of oppression, you have to note the places where you are a beneficiary of these structures. And when we're talking, like capturing, as Bell Hooks did in that phrase, white supremacist heteropatriarchal capitalism, right? Where do you fall in these identities within material access to things? And are you denying someone else access to their full selves and their full liberation by virtue of the way that you show up in the world. And when you laid that out, it was like, I've been doing some version of that first thing, in which I can focus in on the ways that oppression shows up. And even if I was understanding and like engaging with feminist and queer literature and queer politics and queer liberation and all of that, like that was part of my like learning. I wasn't examining the ways that as a cisgender hetero man, even as someone experiencing the atrocities of white supremacy in this country, I was replicating those very hierarchies in my personal relationships and in my politics, right? And so if it's very simple calculation. It's asking, do you believe in the liberation of all people, or do you believe in the liberation of self, right? And if you believe in the liberation of self, you can see it reflected in the work. If you believe in the liberation of all of us, then you own your place in that, and you own the things that you have done wrong, right? And you try to make restitution, you try to make amends, you try to make reparation, because you owe it to those folks that you've harmed.
That was a word for all of y'all. That right there that's a word. It's a word. That is the work. That is the work. And I'm happy and just grateful that I can continue to read your words, and you locating yourself in the very critique that you named, because that's what we got to do. That's what we got to do for all of us to be free. Again, please feel free to put some questions in the chat. I only have one more question for Mychal, but then I want to open up the conversation for others. I have two, so I'm going to try to make this question a two-part one. When in this writing of this particular book, what were your influences? What music were you listening to? What writers were you reading? What spaces were you sojourning in? What food were you eating? I'm just what's the world like that you're pulling from? And then second part of that is, how did your politics shift as you were writing this? And then I'm going to open up for questions. So please feel free to share some.
Yeah. So the book is dedicated to, in part, Gil Scott-Heron and Shirley Chisholm, and they show up a lot in this book, right? And it wasn't intentional at first. It wasn't something that, like, when I sketched out the proposal, it was like, Gil Scott-Heron and Shirley Chisholm, these are going to be in conversation. These two people are going to be in conversation with one another, and I want to draw from their ideas. It was really more organic than that. It was, the ideas that I was wrestling with. My mind would call up Gil or call up Shirley, and like they were there, and I think the more that the book became focused on New York as well, and like the political education that I received, and sort of was wrestling with the ideas of the American dream, and for me, New York City being a microcosm of that, and then thinking about Donald Trump as a product of New York City, but also Shirley Chisholm as a product of New York City, but New York City as a place that Gil Scott-Heron came to as trying to dream and be free. I mean, not just Gil Scott-Heron, but obviously, like, he was just present there for me. And I was trying to think through those relationships. I was trying to think through revolution. I was trying to think through what the presidency means and why any of us would want it, and thinking about Shirley Chisholm making history, running for president, but knowing that she was never going to be president, and thinking about what kind of country this would have to be for Shirley Chisholm to be president, right? Like, those two figures, and I listened to a lot of Gil while I was writing this. It was just a matter of, and I also found out recently, like I said in the dedication, I don't know if they met in life, that Gil actually once performed for a fundraiser for Shirley Chisholm. And, it's just that I think, those two are so prominent in this because the questions felt like ones that they were trying to answer too. And it's not like they're the only ones. It's just that they're the ones who came to me in this moment to try to guide me through it. And so there was that. And then there's obviously the influence of De La Soul. That's where the title of the book comes from. And I think about stakes is high. And I think about just that very construction, stakes is high, and the Black vernacular, and the sort of way in which we flip things and like we talk. But think about that album in particular, and where Pasanu says De La Soul is here to stay like racism. And I think like it's like this funny line, but then it's kind of it's depressing in that way, where it's like the comparison that he can make to talk about the longevity of his group, the way that it's staying power is like racism, right? And it's the permanence of that.
Yeah, it makes me sigh.
It's so sad. But that was part of it, right? Is to say, you know, what I was talking about here was a particular moment where the nation sort of awakened to this idea that an openly racist person could be elected president. But it's like, no, there's a permanence of racism here, right? Like Paz was saying, there's a permanence of racism that has to be dealt with. You know, so there was that. There's so many different things I was reading, and like lots of that's quoted in the book, lots of different epigraphs showing up. You know, I was reading like philosophy from Herbert Marcuse and John Dewey and Hannah Arendt. And, you know, I was reading essays by June Jordan and poetry from Audre Lorde and Morgan Parker and novels like Ling Ma's Severance and, you know, reading the work of Fred Moten. And like, I was pulling from so many different places.
Did y'all hear that? First of all, I just want y'all to get into that whole list right there. That is a list, an amazing list of places to sort of go for source inspiration.
And then it was just so much that, you know, it wasn't even all intentional. It was just like I was reading something. And I think that this is just, this happens, this sort of divine or cosmic intervention in which like because that's where my mind was at the time, like what I was focused on, whatever I was reading sort of like just showed itself to me, or it said, you know, you need to do this. Or I was looking through books in the Strand or like in used bookstores, and it's just like, this is a book. You need to pick up this book by E.B. White. You need to pick up this book by one of the Marx brothers because it's about New York City, and this book is about New York City. And there's so many different things that were just coming to me, and I can't take credit for all of them. I feel like that's just something that's outside of me that was just intervening and trying to make this book the best that it could be. You know, toward the end there, I was eating a lot of Oreos. You asked what I was eating, because I was late. I was so late with this book, and my agent was just like, what can I do? What kind of snacks can I get you to help get you through this? And I was like, I really got a taste for some Oreos. And she sent me a whole...
she's about right there with me right now. Poor Katie. I'm sorry, Katie.
Oh, we put Katie through too much. Yeah, so there's that. My answer to this question was too long, and now I'm forgetting what your second question was.
How you grew up, like how your politics were structured.
Oh, yeah. I think, you know, what was important, there's nothing in this book that's not questioned in the first book, necessarily. The ideas are explored in different ways and sort of like just brought to, in some instances, a more granular level, you know, street level, with like exploring New York City as a place of politics and gentrification, and its reputation as a city of strivers and dreamers and the possibilities and everything. But it's still a gilded city. It's still, you know, extreme wealth here and an extreme poverty sitting right next to it. And I think, you know, I think though that this book does do, where the first book didn't, a much more explicit critique of American empire and American capitalism, because how can we not, right? Like, how can we not acknowledge these things? all of the things that we discussed in terms of white supremacy, heteropatriarchy, cisgender violence, all of these things are deeply connected to these other systems, right? And I think it's trying to acknowledge that, trying to draw those connections, trying to help people see clearly where those things intersect and how to untangle them, and how to understand that all of these systems must fall together. And also it's just a reflection, I think, of the way that a lot of, leftist politics had shifted during this time, right? Like, there is a more explicit critique of American capitalism happening now, even if it didn't necessarily make it onto the presidential ballot. It has made it onto the different spaces, right? Like Cori Bush in St. Louis is making that critique. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, they're all making that critique. And they're now in the halls of power making those critiques of capitalism, of the organizing principle that says that some people should have billions upon billions that they can never spend, while some people suffer in squalor and deprivation, and in the midst of a global pandemic are still houseless, in the midst of the fires raging and the air quality decreasing, still houseless and don't have protection from that. That's what American capitalism produces. And it also produces the conditions for the exploitation of our natural resources to the point of climate disaster. And then we recognize that from climate disaster, the folks who are most impacted on this first wave of what we're experiencing are going to be folks who look like us, folks who we are in community with globally, a diaspora of oppressed peoples. We know all those things, and so just trying to put all of that together, I think I think the first book, it's not as if it's that my politics were so different during that time, but it was talking about a specific thing in a way that didn't necessarily lend itself toward these other things being included. And this book it felt very necessary to make that like a central part of the exploration.
We love to hear it. We love to hear it. We have a question from Dawu. I'm hoping I'm getting your name right. And the question is, who are you writing to or for? And how broad or small is your perceived audience?
This is a question that I think about all the time. It's a question that I've started teaching recently, which is a strange thing for me, but I've been teaching in different MFA programs, and this is
You're being real humble about what you're doing right now, but you are teaching. What title do you have here? And
the title is not a thing.
No, it's important. These things are important.
I'm distinguished writer in residence at Hunter College, and
that's amazing. You have Audre Lorde. Come on now, it's a legacy.
But I put this question to my students because I think it's such an important question, because it shapes the way that you write, because what are you trying to tell those folks? What are you explaining to them? Does what you're writing need explanation to that audience? It's a question of craft, even more than it's a political question to me. And the first book was very much a book that was written toward, as I said it then, and I think I say it now, it's just like 17-year-old Black boys, because that's where my headspace was. And like, I was trying to write the book that I thought I would have needed at that time. And 17 was just like in my mind, just because so much of that first book was, its start was with the killing of Trayvon Martin, who was 17 years old when George Zimmerman took his life. And so that age was something that I just like really fixated on. It's like that late adolescence, like on the cusp of what we think of as adulthood, or legally as adulthood, but like, are you really, and that formation of self that's happening then, or hopefully, but was snatched away from Trayvon. So that's the first book. This one, you know, it was written in response to a particular political moment. And I think there are multiple audiences for this book. I think I was aiming a lot of the critiques or a lot of the questions and a lot of the challenges at folks who were politically activated because of the election of 2016, who are suddenly showing up in the streets, who are suddenly angry, who could write signs and protest and say, like, if Hillary Clinton was elected, I'd be at brunch right now. And it's like, I want to challenge that person. And I want to say, well, the problem is exactly that you would have been at brunch, right? Like that you would not be mounting a political challenge, even though the very issues that you're talking about persist or have persisted throughout American history, and that you only object because of the garishness and just and bloviating of Donald Trump, the like naked bigotry of Donald Trump. Well, that's the problem, is that you like, I'm glad anyone gets engaged, but it's like, if your analysis falls short of indicting the system and you only focus on this singular figure, then we have some conversations to have. So that's one audience there. But I think also it is for more like seasoned political actors to understand differently the way that these things. So part of one of the sections is talking about like the rise of a sort of young socialist leaning left in the wake of Occupy and the Bernie Sanders campaign. And this is not all of them, but it was the white folks who were drawn up into that were trying to be dismissive of ideas of racial justice or interrogating misogyny and sexism and queer politics, because they were trying to say that capitalism is the only thing that needs to be defeated here, and that by virtue of defeating capitalism, all of these other systems wouldn't have a leg to stand on. And it's just like, well, you can defeat capitalism and still leave the vestiges of these other ideologies in place, as we've seen before. I don't have any reason to believe that the universal that you talk about, the universal we, is actually a we if you are coming from a white supremacist nation and trying to form a multiracial democracy. It's inevitably going to be some of that left over, and so you have to name it and you have to address it. So there's things like that in the book that are meant to challenge people who have been politically engaged forever, people whose political engagement sort of starts and stops on the presidential level, and like how we should divest from the presidential politics in a way. Like we've seen, like, are wondering why we allow so much of the power in our country to be vested with the president. There's lots of stuff there that I hope is challenging. Things about Martin Luther King Jr. that maybe I hope are challenging for people. Things around Colin Kaepernick and like just American symbols and the process of American descent and the American narrative, I hope are challenging for everyone. I say that to say, it's not that I think that the audience, it's not that I didn't have specific audiences in mind when writing, like I named them, but I do think that the book has a challenge for everyone. And so the audience should be very broad.
We have a final question here for you. And it says, in your book, you talk about abolition in a context of prisons and criminal justice, I think. Do you have any hope for the new efforts on this? And I'm assuming the new efforts are called around abolitionism in this moment. No abolitionist is under the delusion that it happens right now. We have so far to go in even like placing abolitionist politics on the actual dockets.
I think this summer was huge. This past summer was huge in getting people to engage with abolition as an idea, and to understand that folks talking about abolition are not just talking about what needs to be destroyed. And I think it's important to name what you want to be dismantled. I do think that that's absolutely part of it. I think it is necessary not just to eliminate like the idea of prison, but the actual walls themselves, right? Like I do think that that's important. But as Ruth Wilson Gilmore will always remind us, abolition is not just about that. Abolition is about the abolition of a society, of systems that would require prison and policing, right? And I think that there's the engagement there, and that's the thing that people are should be taking away from it, is understanding that the process is not going to be the process of shifting people's imaginations around policing and prisons starts with getting them to understand the way those structures are meant to uphold an inequality that's built in on the front end. And that if we could change that part, if we can get to a place of equity for people within our political systems, if we get to a place of providing people's basic needs, I mean, just talking about like adequate and safe housing, we're talking about healthcare, we're talking education, we're talking clean water and healthy foods, all of those just very basic things. If we start there, you have no choice then but to call into question the quote unquote necessity of police and prisons, because those things are only necessary because you are managing inequality through violence. You're managing it that way. And so if you start with the world as just, if you start with a just world, what role do police and prisons have in that construction? And the abolitionist answer is to say they don't have a role. And so once we get people to engage with abolitionist politics in that way, then I think that opens up the door for more people to come on board to the ideology.
Mychal, you look, every time I sit and engage you, I'm clear that I'm talking to a deep thinker, a cultural critic, an intellectual, someone who is always consistently teaching us. And I'm just grateful for you. I'm grateful for the second book. I'm grateful that you are here, not only to talk about it, but to celebrate what it's going to do in the world. So thank you so much.
I'm so grateful for you, because none of this happens without you. None of it happens without being in community with you and all of our other brothers and sisters, siblings that, you know, we do this work in community with. We build knowledge through the community. We understand that we're also committed to like the furthering of this work and the furthering of our liberation. And I've learned so much from you as a beautiful, beautiful soul, as a beautiful writer, as a preacher and spiritual guide, like all of that. You just are everything, brother.
And I'm so happy you finished your book. I was like, now I got something to read that can inspire me to get the second book done. I want to turn it over back to Allison. Thank you all for holding space for us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. Both of you are just jewels, and we really appreciate your being here. I was saying to Allison off camera, I said, I think we need another event where we'll turn the tables and have Mychal have conversation with Darnell. Wouldn't that be great? So watch out. We have all kinds of ideas. Thank you. And the other thing I want to say is thank you for being cross-generational, intersectional, that I need to use the words of today, I guess, but really crossing all these lines and borders, because we really are all together. And those of us in my generation we need to hear from you. And oftentimes I have people say, well, I want to know what you think. And I tell them, I said, I really want to know what you think too. So we need that. The other thing that I want to thank you for is your scholarship and your broad reading and knowledge of things. And to you, Darnell, for being so well prepared for this event. And I really, really do appreciate that. We've struggled along trying to do these virtual events, and we're learning as we go as well. So I appreciate both of you for being here and participating and sharing. I want to say one more thing that I missed saying at the beginning. We are beginning a partnership with Wayne County Community College to do some things together. I think a question came in from one of the people that we've been talking with, and we wanted to do it particularly with you because they have a large audience of cross ages, and a lot of young people, a lot of young Black men and women at Wayne County Community College, the downtown.
All three campuses.
All three campuses,
Yeah.
yes. There are 3 campuses for Wayne County, which is a very richly Black county. So hopefully this will be the beginning of some other things to come. And I'm just really wanting people to hear and see you talk with each other and talk so seriously and so intelligently and so thoughtfully and so scholarly about what you do and the conditions that we find ourselves in. So again, thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We just want to remind everybody that the books are available at Source Booksellers, all 3. So that would be Stakes is High. I never know what the camera is.
Yes.
Invisible Man Got the Whole World Watching. No Ashes in the Fire. SourceBooksellersOnline.com.
So YouTube.
Yep. So thank you both.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great rest of the tour.
Thank you.
And, and we're so happy to host you both.
Keep up with us because we have things in mind.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We'll be in touch. Bye, y'all. Much love to everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.